One of the things I always like at this part of the year is to listen to the predictions that are made about next year. Actually, I like to do something a little more insidious. Instead of listening to all the projections that are made about 2023, I like to look back at the predictions that were made about 2022 to see how far wrong all the prognosticators were. A lot of people try to do that. I have a collection in one of my files of predictions that went really badly wrong. And one of my favorites is a prediction that was made in 1899 as they were about to click into 1900, and the city of New York was growing, and there were more and more cabs. And at that point in New York City, most of the cabs were still horse-drawn carriages. And they had a problem in New York City because as the city was growing, already over 1 million people by 1900, there were so many horse-drawn carriages that they're running out of place for the manure that all those horses were producing. And the gentleman made a prediction that by 1950, unless something was done, there would be so much manure filling the streets of New York City that they were going to have to move the whole city. Of course, he hadn't predicted within a couple of years the horse-drawn carriages would be replaced by automobiles and other vehicles. And so we have this thing that we do. We look ahead, we make projections, and often we're pretty far wrong. Bible prophecy is very different than that. Bible prophecy is even very different than most of the other prophecies that we look at. At this time of year, Time Magazine or Maclean's or some of the others will trot out some of the wild prophecies of a man called Nostradamus. And Nostradamus actually was a man with no great skill. He wrote what are called quatrains. They're verses of 4 lines, and he wrote tens of thousands of them. And if you read his books, all of them are completely disjuncted, unrelated, 4-line poems that predict all kinds of weird and wacky things. And there's so many wild predictions that if you dig through them, you can be sure to find a prediction about just about anything. And so if you think business is going to be good this year, you can find a line from Nostradamus that says that. If you think business will be bad, you can find a line of Nostradamus that says that. If you think that business will be neutral, you can find a line of Nostradamus that says that. He just shot all over the place, and it's a little bit like trying to shoot at the side of a barn. If you shoot long enough, eventually you'll hit the barn, and that's really the way Nostradamus did prophecy. Bible prophecy is far different from that. And one of the things that I find intriguing as people look at some of the prophecies of the Old Testament that speak about the coming of Jesus, they read through long books and they look for these little bits of prophecy. And so there's this feeling that somewhere lost in the book of Isaiah and Jeremiah and Ezekiel, there are these little lines here and there. And if we read through the whole 66 chapters of the book, here and there's a couple of verses here and a few verses there and a verse tucked in over there that if you look at it the right way, sort of speak maybe about the Lord Jesus if you look at it in the right light and in the right angle. That is in fact not the way the books of prophecy work. As you look through the book of Isaiah that we will focus on this morning, in fact, the whole book from beginning to end builds to a crescendo about the coming of the Lord Jesus Christ. And every verse and every chapter in Isaiah works together to build the expectation of his coming. At one point, when Jesus is having an argument with his religious detractors, he makes an interesting comment to them. They're searching for the scriptures and they're looking for wisdom from God. And Jesus says this to them, "You search the scriptures." And to them, the scriptures was the Old Testament, the 5 books of Moses, the books of the prophets, and the books of poetry. And Jesus says, "You search the scriptures because you think that in them you have eternal life. And it is there that they that bear witness about me, and yet refuse to come to me." Jesus told them, the whole of the Old Testament speaks about me. In Luke 24, after his death and resurrection, Jesus is meeting up with a few of his disciples. They're leaving Jerusalem quite dejected. They had hoped that Jesus would be the Messiah, and he winds up being crucified, and they'd missed that piece in the prophecy that spoke about the fact that Jesus would come in the flesh, that he would live a sinless life, that he would go to the cross, and he would be raised on the 3rd day. And as he walks with these dejected disciples, Luke 24 tells us that he walks them through the whole of the scriptures. He begins with the book of Genesis, through the law of Moses, through the history books, through the poetry books, and through the books of the prophets. And he tells them in each one of these books the things about himself. And so it is with today's text. It isn't this little exceptional piece of prophecy. It isn't that Isaiah made a bunch of guesses and 1 or 2 of them happened to be right. It is part of the flow of the whole prophecy of the book that points to Jesus. We don't know exactly when this text was written. It speaks about some oppressors that are there. It speaks about a foreign army that has overcome Israel and that is making life hard for them. But that happened at a couple of times in Israel's history. We have a couple of guesses, a couple of moments when we think this text might have been written, but we don't know for sure. But we know a couple of things from the text. First, Isaiah tells us that there is trouble. And there is trouble because there is a bad ruler on the throne. Now, I know you can't relate to that because we don't have any problems in our country today, and none of our problems have anything to do with bad political leaders. We've got the best political leaders in the world, and everything going as possibly well as it could be. So if you don't relate to this, then you can disconnect this morning. But he's writing at a time when things are not well, and the people are longing for good leadership. And so in the text, God says that he's going to do three things. God promises that when Messiah comes, he's going to break into our world of trouble and struggle, and he's going to bring great light and great joy. He's going to remove the oppressor, he's going to remove the tyrant, and he's going to be replaced with a good leader. Our text this morning is Isaiah 9, verses 1 to 7, verses that I'm sure you've heard before. Isaiah 9 in verses 1 to 7. Hear the word of God. For there will be no gloom for her who is in anguish. In the former time he brought into contempt the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali, but in the latter time he's made glorious the way of the sea, the land beyond the Jordan, Galilee of the Gentile. And here we pick up on our projected text. The people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. Those who dwelt in a land of deep darkness, on them has light shone. You have multiplied the nation. You have increased its joy. They rejoice before you as with joy at the harvest, as they are glad when they divide the spoil. For the yoke of his burden and the staff for his shoulder, the rod of his oppressor, you have broken as on the day of Midian. For every boot of the tramping warrior in battle tumult, and every garment rolled in blood, will be burnt as fuel for the fire. For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulders, and his name shall be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the increase of his government and of peace there will be no end. On the throne of David and over his kingdom, to establish it and to uphold it with justice and with righteousness from this time forth and forevermore. The zeal of the Lord of hosts will do this. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. So the text says, light will break into darkness and bring this great joy. It's interesting, the text is written, and obviously the man knows his geography. Every time Israel was invaded, the foreign invaders would always come in from the north. There was a section in the northern part of Israel where they weren't quite sure, is this part of our country, is it not? It's sort of the borderline area. We're not sure where the boundary is, and that's always where trouble started. And so as God makes this promise that light will finally come to his people, it's interesting that he chooses to have it come from the same place where trouble normally starts. They're used to looking to the north and seeing trouble arise, but this time it's different. It's not darkness and oppression that's come. It's light that comes and rejoicing. I like the images that he uses. He uses two images. He says, it's like rejoicing when there's a bumper crop. You have multiplied the nation. This isn't just an ordinary harvest. My younger sister and my brother-in-law took over the little family homestead where we grew up as children many years ago. And my mother, for many years, had a garden that was going there, and we had many animals. We had rabbits and cows and a pig and a couple of other animals. And I got to tell you, that garden is about the most well-fertilized corner of the piece of land out in the area where they live. And good, black, rich soil. And my younger sister is pretty strategic as she's kept this garden going. And all year she plans ahead. We'll be there for Christmas this year, and I'm pretty sure that on the island counter she'll already have her seed catalogs for this coming year. And Marie experiments. She likes to try the right kinds of seeds. And she plants about 5 or 6 different kinds of tomatoes each year because there's some nice Italian tomatoes that work well for tomato paste and spaghetti sauce. And there's nice big beefeater tomatoes that make a big tomato, and you can just do a BLT with a single slice of this big tomato. And then there's the little cherry tomatoes that go well in a salad. And so every year she plants 4 or 5 different kinds of tomatoes. But she plays around with her seeds, and she tries to find the seeds that produce the best tomatoes for her climate. And about 7 or 8 years ago, she got into trouble. She tried a new kind of seed, and it was supposed to be a good, fertile kind of tomato plant. And man, was it ever. And I forgot the amount, but she was somewhere around 2,000 pounds of tomatoes in this little garden. And my younger sister Marie and her husband, the kids have moved away from home. My mother lives with them. There's the 3 of them. And suffice it to say that 2,000 pounds of tomatoes was more than they could use. And so they sent out distress calls as all these tomatoes were ripe and falling off the vine. And all the neighbors came, and all the people from church came, and all the sisters. And we all showed up with buckets, and we ate tomatoes like you wouldn't believe. There was this bumper crop. This is an agrarian people. The people of Israel live off the land, and they had lived through famine. They had lived through moments when there wasn't enough to eat. And he tries to give them an idea of what it will be like, of the kind of joy and rejoicing that there will be when the Messiah finally arrives. And the best image he can use, it's an image they can relate to because they've had so many bad years with bad crops, with famines, and they're longing for a good harvest. And he says, when the Messiah comes, there is going to be a bumper crop like you have never seen, and we are going to rejoice together like people rejoice when there is a bountiful harvest. Then he uses a second image that they can relate to. Several times they had been overrun by foreign armies. And a couple of times in their history, the tables had been turned, and they were the ones who conquered the enemy. And when you conquered the enemy, there's this neat thing you got to do. You spoiled the enemy troops. When you won the battle and all the foreign soldiers ran away, you came home with their shields and their swords and their weapons. And if you were lucky, they would be carrying gold and things of value, and you would bring all of that home. And he says the rejoicing on that day when the Messiah comes, it's not only going to be like the end of the year when there is a bumper crop, when there's more food than you need and you know you're not going to be hungry anymore. He says it's like when you've been victorious in battle and the foreign army has run away and you come home with the spoils and you're victorious. These are moments that we find it hard to relate to, but this is how they express their joy. All of their sadness, all of their sorrows, the struggle they had lived, the struggles of being hungry, the struggles of famine, the struggles of being oppressed, of being invaded, of being controlled and conquered, all of that would be over on this day of rejoicing. But it's not just that famine would be resolved. It's not that there would be light and joy. There was a problem. There was an oppressor. There was this foreign army that had come and had taken over. And God is going to deal with that. There were moments when there had been good kings in Israel. Not a lot of great kings, but a couple of good kings. And there was often trouble because those kings couldn't control the foreign armies around them. Israel is this tiny little country lost in the middle of the sweep between Egypt and the Assyrians and the Babylonians and the Romans coming in and coming through. And so God is going to have a very tall order. If he's going to solve the problems of his people, he's not only going to have to remove the tyrant and the oppressor to bring rejoicing and light and peace, but how he does this will be important. The people had known a lot of struggle. The people had known one battle after another. And God's promise isn't just that he's going to kick out the oppressor that's there now. God's promise is that he's going to do away with warfare. There's a strange expression. He says, every boot soiled in battle will be burnt with fire. Every garment used for war will be consumed. We spoke yesterday about the Messiah coming and the swords being beaten into plowshares and the spears being beaten into pruning hooks. And this ties into the same thing. It says that when God comes in, when he removes the tyranny and the oppression and evil and sin, he just doesn't deal with the oppressor. He does away with warfare. The battles are over. The struggles are done. A little bit later in the book of Isaiah, in Isaiah 40, in that great chapter, he begins and he says, "Comfort my people, speak tenderly to Jerusalem, and say to her that her warfare is ended." Time and time again, Jerusalem had seen warfare. She had been besieged, she had been run through, she had been burned to the ground, she had been desecrated time and time and time again. And so God's promise to his people in Jerusalem isn't just that I'm going to deal with the problem you have now, I'm going to deal with the troubles. I'm not just going to deal with the oppressor that's there now, I'm going to do away with warfare and with violence and with conflict. That's a pretty tall order. How do you do that? How do you bring an end to evil and to tyranny? How do you bring an end to oppression? Well, somehow you've got to remove the tyrant and replace him with a good leader. The whole section actually is written like a birth announcement. We don't do royal birth announcements this way anymore. Those of you who are royal watchers might remember the process and the protocol when the little royal heirs are born. My wife likes to watch this on TV when they come out, when the princess, whoever she is at the point where she's about to give birth, and she goes to the hospital, and the royal watchers and the paparazzis are camped out around the hospital, and they wait for that announcement that's going to come from Buckingham Palace. There's a way that announcement is worded. The last 2 or 3 verses of our text this morning actually are written exactly the way a birth announcement would have been written in those days. This is how it would have come, not from Buckingham Palace, but from the palace in Babylon or in Jerusalem when a new royal heir was announced. Except that he does some things that are a little different. This is not the way a royal delivery would normally be announced. Normally, there's something up front about the royal lineage. Normally, when Buckingham Palace announces that a new prince has been born or a new princess, they will tell you how far down they are in the lineage, and they tell you that if these 6 people die in a car accident and this one leaves the country and this one gets defrocked, then they're 8th in line for the crown or something like this. But this sounds a little different. It sounds like there's this child who will be dropped in from outside. At the same time, he'll be a descendant, he'll be on the throne of David, but this child will be given from outside. How can this be? How can this child be given by God and still be in David's family tree? We know the answer to that because we know the end of the story. And actually, Jesus himself paraphrases this in some of the prophetic words that he uses. Remember when he's talking to Nicodemus late at night, and he says, "For God so loved the world that he gave his Son." And so the text in Isaiah does this weird thing. He says, a child is born, there's a human being that comes out of the womb with 10 little toes and 10 little fingers and eyes and crying at his birth with a placenta and all the mess of childbirth and everything that needs to be done when the cord is cut. There's all of this. There's a child. It's a baby who's born. But a son is given. It's not 2 separate people. There's a human baby that's born here. There was a pregnancy. There was waters breaking. There's this messy delivery with all that it entails. But this child that's born, he's a son that's given. And so this son will be given. The government will be upon his shoulders. And he's going to take it from here. Well, this little child has a tall order ahead of him. This new ruler, this newborn child king. What exactly are his credentials? How do we know he's going to pull this off? What authorizes this little baby to step on the throne and to do all that he promises to do? And in a way that only Hebrew prophecy can do, Isaiah stretches together 8 words. He pairs them together in 4 doublets. Some of the English translations put a comma between each one. He will be called Wonderful, comma, Counselor, comma, Mighty, comma, God, comma, Everlasting. But actually, in the way it's laid out grammatically in the Hebrew, they're sets. He's a Wonderful Counselor. He's Mighty God. He's Everlasting Father. He's a Prince of Peace. So what are his qualifications? We're told he is a wonderful counselor. It speaks of his wisdom and his surprising intelligence. So much so that he surprises us by the way he will wisely rule. His adeptness and wisdom will overwhelm us. He will think of things that nobody else has ever thought of. He will do things that no mere ordinary human would ever think to do. Some of the kings of Israel, some of their previous leaders had made some pretty stupid decisions and had behaved in crazy ways, but not this new ruler. He will be a wonderful counselor. He knows what he's doing, and he will do it well. Well, knowing what to do is just half the battle. Not only do you need to know what needs to be done, you got to have the power to do it. Well, that's okay, because this wonderful counselor is also the mighty God. Now, I'm going to tell you, when I prepare to speak on Sunday mornings, I have a lot of commentaries that I read. And I've got probably about 20 commentaries just on the book of Isaiah. And some of them are written by people who believe that the text of Isaiah is God's word, inspired to Isaiah, that we're reading the very words of God. And I got a couple of commentators who think, well, it's a nice book, it's nice poetry, and take it or leave it. And they have a problem when they get to this text, because this text clearly says that this son who's going to be given, this child who's going to be born, pointing to Jesus the Messiah, Isaiah appears to say that he is God. And I always get a great deal of pleasure at seeing the gymnastics that these commentators have to go through to try and explain that what the text says, it doesn't really mean by what it says. It really means something else, but that's not really what it is, but because it's unbelievable the contortions they have to go through to try and make Isaiah not say what Isaiah clearly says. Isaiah says, a child will be born, a human being, a baby in a manger, and he will be mighty God. Wonderful counselor, the mighty God. Well, at this point, I'm not sure whether to be encouraged or whether to be afraid. I worked for a couple of businesses where I had a boss who thought he was pretty mighty and pretty powerful. At one point, there was a line when Microsoft was getting pretty big. The line was, what's the difference between Bill Gates and God? And the answer is that God doesn't think he's Bill Gates. You've met these people who thought they were God's gift to mankind, and they let you know it. And when I see somebody who comes in and who is this wonderful counselor, who's mighty God, maybe he's just going to crush us all. Somebody that mighty and that powerful. But he's not just a wonderful counselor. He's not just a mighty God. He will also be everlasting Father. Father. Not boss. Not emperor. Not king with the right of life and death. He will be our everlasting Father, caring for us with compassion and with care. Now, this is unusual in the Old Testament. The Jews almost never referred to God as Father. It was sacrilegious. God was a distant, powerful creator of the universe who you approach with great fear and trembling, whose name was so holy that you didn't even mention his name when you could avoid it. And only in a handful of places is God referred to as Father. And they always try to do it in a way that seems distant. God is spoken of as being the Father of the nation. The closest they come to a personal relationship in a couple of the Psalms, we're told that God will be the father of the orphan and the provider for the widow. But nobody in the Old Testament ever had the gall or the audacity to think that God was my Father. So when Jesus comes on the scene and speaks of God as my Father, they are offended. You don't do this. This is familiarity with God that you just don't do. And not only does Jesus refer to God as Father, he refers to God as Abba, Daddy. The one who comes to us in the manger, the Son who is given, the child who is born, is the wonderful counselor, the mighty God, the everlasting Father, Daddy. And then one last title. He will be called the Prince of Peace. We spent quite a bit of time last night thinking about what that meant, that he has brought peace. But there's an interesting side question that we never really think about. Why isn't he called the King of Peace? Ever wondered that? He's the Prince of Peace. I mean, isn't a king better than a prince? Why just the prince? Well, there's a couple of people who think that, and I think they've got some of the right idea, some people who think that if he came and he was the Emperor of Peace or the King of Peace, that would feel a little crushing. And there's something about a prince that feels a little more humble, a little more on our level. But we've got a problem with the text, with the word. We've gotten used to British and French monarchy, and in our minds, because we followed French and British royalty, we think, first you become a prince, and then when your daddy dies, who's the king, then you become the king. And so a prince is kind of like a king in waiting. He's like down the line, 3 or 4 down the succession reign. But that's not the way it works in every country. Prince Albert II of Monaco, who came to the throne on the death of remember Prince Rainier? He's the one who married Grace Kelly, Prince Rainier, Prince Albert II. They're the head of state. And they're the head of state in the way that King Charles III doesn't fit the bill in England. Because a prince fulfills some administrative duties and responsibilities. A king is a titularly head of state. He's head of state, but just so he can get his money on your coins and on your paper bills. And then he opens Parliament once in a while and he cuts the ribbon at a few official occasions. But a prince actually rolls up his sleeves, gets his hands dirty, and administers things and does things. There are a couple of neat examples where the text actually uses the word prince. When John begins the book of Revelation, he has this vision of Jesus. And as Jesus comes and speaks to the churches that are there, this is what he says: "Grace to you and peace from him who is and who was and who is to come, from Jesus Christ, the faithful witness, the firstborn of the dead, and the ruler of the kings on earth." And it's the same word that's used there, the prince of the kings on earth. The point is that Jesus will rule. He will be a Prince of Peace. He will put an end to warfare and oppression, to violence and killing. His will not be a reign of terror and oppression like the tyrants of the earth, but a reign of peace and righteousness. Listen again to the way his kingdom is described in verse 7. "Of the increase of his government and of peace there will be no end." Interesting thought, isn't it? We live in a world where of war there is no end. When Jesus comes to the throne of peace, there will be no end. On the throne of David and over his kingdom, to establish it and hold it with justice and with righteousness from this time forth and forevermore. And there's an important final line. The zeal of the Lord of hosts will accomplish this. This is guaranteed. It's signed, sealed, delivered. The Lord, Master of the universe, guarantees that this will happen. Over these past 4 weeks, we have celebrated all that we find in the Christ child born in the manger: hope, love, joy, and peace. And we add to all of that this day the sure knowledge that just as surely as he rules in our hearts and in our lives here and now, Jesus Christ will one day return to the world and to its kingdoms, to bring a reign of justice and righteousness and peace to which there will be no end. For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulders, and his name shall be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the increase of his government and of peace there will be no end. With justice and righteousness he will reign from this time and forevermore. The zeal of the Lord of hosts will do this. Amen.